Well, I'm joined in the studio now by the African analyst Yaw Afriyie from the Africa Matters consultancy. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. A lot of conflicting reports about what happened in Garissa, with local reports saying that up to 20 police officers may have been killed, but now the government saying only one policeman was injured and there were no deaths. I mean, who do we believe? Because there was even a presidential tweet sending condolences to the families of the police, which was then subsequently deleted.
Well, whatever the reports are, these are certainly very difficult times for Kenya. We have seen over the period of 2 months, prior to this incident, for the Kenyan government in tackling al-Shabaab that has grown increasingly powerful over a period of time. But whatever the final figure is, remains yet to be known. These are unsubstantiated, and we would hope that the casualty levels are as low as possible for Kenya's sake. But again, the Kenyan government have a very difficult task ahead in trying to embolden its security forces, boost morale within the military, at the police level, and at various intelligence gathering agencies within the state apparatus, in order to, as it were, have a better, more holistic approach in tackling al-Shabaab, which seems to be encroaching more and more into Kenyan territory.
Well, absolutely, because, of course, as you said, it was only 2 months ago that 100. How close to Garissa University this latest attack occurred, but I'm curious to know what the perception is among people in that area about how the government is tackling the al-Shabaab threat.
Speaking to a wide range of our sources on the ground, we believe that the perception on the ground is one that the government is beginning to lose control of Kenyan territorial integrity. I mean, certainly confidence from within Kenya is very important in order to tackle terrorism in any form, but particularly not so long after Garissa has happened, a fresh wave of attack, whether it's 25 or less or more, is quite a blow for the Kenyan authorities.
And there is no doubt in your mind, and from your sources at the moment, that the culprits in the
to pass al-Shabaab sort of tactics, if you like. But what is encouraging is the Kenyan government's approach in, as it were, remedying and tackling al-Shabaab head-on. We've heard several pronouncements from Uhuru Kenyatta and some of his senior ministers within the security apparatus in Kenya that they want to tackle al-Shabaab in a more forceful manner. They want a regional approach. They want to work with the international community. John Kerry was in Nairobi, I believe, last week to discuss, among other things, politics and security with the Kenyan authorities. And this sense that the Kenyans can muster sort of international support, coupled with AMISOM's presence, the AU and the East Africa forces, it's all very, very much good news. But whether or not, in the short term, the administration can tackle and bring some confidence to these communities remains to be seen.
There are some speculation as to whether al-Shabaab, because we can see that they appear to be losing ground in Somalia, whether or not they're trying to sort of move into Kenya and you know, dominate more places like, or certainly attack more places like Garissa.
Well, I suppose they are losing ground in Somalia, and that's partly because AMISOM has done a relatively good job in that part of Somalia. But whether or not they are losing ground and want to come into Kenya, that is more of a complex issue, because some say that al-Shabaab are already ingrained in Kenyan society, in the northeastern parts of the coastal areas. These are communities with largely Muslim dispositions and large Muslim communities that some say are already ingrained in Kenya. So whether or not the Kenyans can ultimately resist this forward encroachment by al-Shabaab remains to be seen. It's a difficult environment.
Yaw Afriyie, the Africa analyst from the African Matters consultancy, thank you very much indeed. And you will be, of course, back later in the program.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Well, still with me here in the studio is the Africa analyst Yaw Afriyie. Thanks very much indeed for sticking with us there. Now, the international campaigning organization, ONE, has published this report in line with the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, which are set to expire this year. Now, those 8 goals, which were established in 2012, were aimed at getting rid of global poverty. When looking at Africa, do you think there's been much advancement in regards to that development over the past 13 years?
Certainly, there has been a lot of improvement, significant improvement over the past 13 years. As you say, the Millennium Development Goals expire this year, and so there's an impetus from the international community and NGOs such as ONE to bring this back to the agenda, quite rightly. But as we've seen over the past 12 months at least, aid has taken different dimensions. So the traditional aid model that we were used to, which was handouts to poor African countries, is not the model that is being practiced at the moment. We've seen that aid has played a very important, vital role in Ebola and combating that in the 3 most affected countries. We've seen that security aid has increased from some countries, namely France, in Central African Republic, Mali, and so on. But aid continues to be a vital tool in helping the poorest to come out of poverty, and I believe it's the right call from the ONE group.
I think what a lot of people, particularly Africans, find particularly odious is the idea of these constant calls for aid. You see what I mean? To, you know, if Africa's got to meet its Millennium Development Goals, there's got to be aid from the West. If Africa's got to tackle Ebola, there's got to be aid from the West. And you wonder, what is the onus on African nations themselves to do something about the condition in which they find their countries?
I mean, often a lot of African countries are willing to, as it were, help their own citizens out of the scourge of poverty and to improve educational systems and healthcare. But often what is lacking are the resources and the revenue from within the state, generated from within the states itself.
Well, the problem is that the little that's generated is mismanaged.
Absolutely. That is also a case levied against African governments, and one they ought to take seriously, and I believe they are beginning to take
Well, I don't know. I mean,
seriously.
look at a country like Nigeria, for instance. For the fuel shortage, for the fuel subsidy, is $8 billion, okay? But they end up paying $17 billion out every year. Now imagine the difference that the additional amount of money would make to poverty alleviation. So a lot of it is sheer irresponsibility, sheer corruption, and the fact that the money isn't being channeled in the right place. So should the focus be less on organizations like ONE going on about, getting more Western aid, and more to trying to get African countries to become more fiscally disciplined and hold their leaders more accountable?
I believe we need different approaches. We need a balanced approach, one which looks at educational systems, healthcare systems for the poorest in the world. And that is where organizations such as ONE remain very important. But we also, as you say, need to look at approaches where governments themselves become more fiscally responsible. And that is about building up the institutions of state. We have a lot of African countries where economic institutions aren't properly managed, where political institutions are under-resourced, and that is a choice that the governments of Africa make themselves. And whether or not those are the right choices or the wrong choices are for the government themselves to analyse. But what the UK, for example, does is it supports African countries in largely 3 spheres, which is the traditional aid model. Recently, the UK kept its 0.7% gross national income commitment to Africa.
But a lot of other countries, Western countries, haven't actually done that.
Absolutely.
I mean, let's not talk about what the Africans do for them, so let's talk about what the West says it's going to do for those countries. And part of it was that they have targets of 0.7% of gross national income to be used towards aid. What's happening with that?
Well, I think there are a combination of factors. The Eurozone over the past few years has slowed down. I think we're talking about the G7 countries that committed a few years ago. The G7 countries have largely slowed down. Those who can and once you have committed, the UK, in 2010, then candidate for the Conservatives, David Cameron, said he would ring-fence international development aid. He did.
Right.
But of course, certain sacrifices had to be made at the national level. With the other European countries, that same commitment has not been made, and so I believe that they ought to review how they...
Okay, now this meeting is supposed to take place in Ethiopia.
Yes.
And Ethiopia has passed restrictive regulations on non-government organizations and on foreign funding. I mean, does that make it a bit strange to hold it in a place like that?
I mean, it does make it a bit strange, but as you and I both know, Addis Ababa is the political hub for Africa.
It's the Brussels
of Africa.
Africa, yeah.
And so if you want anything, well, some sort of international repute discussed, you discuss it at Addis Ababa. I think that is the sole reason for that.
Okay, Yaw Afriyie, Africa analyst, thank you very much indeed.